Globally, Muslims have the highest fertility rate, an average of 3.1 children per woman, well above replacement level, 2.1, the minimum typically needed to maintain a stable population. 6 Christians are second, at 2.7 children per woman. Hindu fertility, 2.4, is similar to the global average, 2.5. Worldwide, Jewish fertility, 2.3 children per woman, also is above replacement level. All the other groups have fertility levels too low to sustain their populations. Folk religions, 1.8 children per woman, other religions, 1.7, the unaffiliated, 1.7, and Buddhists, 1.6. Another important determinant of growth is the current age distribution of each religious group, whether its adherents are predominantly young, with their prime childbearing years still ahead, or older and largely past their childbearing years. In 2010, more than a quarter of the world's total population, 27%, was under the age of 15. But an even higher percentage of Muslims, 34%, and Hindus, 30%, were younger than 15, while the share of Christians under 15 matched the global average, 27%. These bulging youth populations are among the reasons that Muslims are projected to grow faster than the world's overall population, and that Hindus and Christians are projected to roughly keep pace with worldwide population growth. All the remaining groups have smaller than average youth populations, and many of them have disproportionately large numbers of adherents over the age of 59. For example, 11% of the world's population was at least 60 years old in 2010. But fully 20% of Jews around the world are 60 or older, as are 15% of Buddhists, 14% of Christians, 14% of adherents of other religions. Taken as a whole, 13% of the unaffiliated and 11% of adherents of folk religions. By contrast, just 7% of Muslims and 8% of Hindus are in this oldest age category. In addition to fertility rates and age distributions, religious switching is likely to play a role in the growth of religious groups. But conversion patterns are complex and varied. In some countries, it is fairly common for adults to leave their childhood religion and switch to another faith. In others, changes in religious identity are rare, legally cumbersome, or even illegal. The Pew Research Center projections attempt to incorporate patterns in religious switching in 70 countries, where surveys provide information on the number of people who say they no longer belong to the religious group in which they were raised. In the projection model, all directions of switching are possible, and they may be partially offsetting. In the United States, for example, surveys find that some people who were raised with no religious affiliation have switched to become Christians, while some who grew up as Christians have switched to become unaffiliated. These types of patterns are projected to continue as future generations come of age. For more details on how and where switching was modeled, see the methodology. For alternative growth scenarios involving either switching in additional countries or no switching at all, see Chapter 1. Over the coming decades, Christians are expected to experience the largest net losses from switching. Globally, about 40 million people are projected to switch into Christianity, while 106 million are projected to leave, with most joining the ranks of the religiously unaffiliated. See chart above. All told, the unaffiliated are expected to add 97 million people and lose 36 million via switching, for a net gain of 61 million by 2050. Modest net gains through switching also are expected for Muslims, 3 million, adherents of folk religions, 3 million, and members of other religions, 2 million. Jews are expected to experience a net loss of about 300,000 people due to switching, while Buddhists are expected to lose nearly 3 million. International migration is another factor that will influence the projected size of religious groups in various regions and countries. Forecasting future migration patterns is difficult, because migration is often linked to government policies and international events that can change quickly. For this reason, many population projections do not include migration in their models. But working with researchers at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Luxembourg, Austria, the Pew Research Center has developed an innovative way of using data on past migration patterns to estimate the religious composition of migrant flows in the decades ahead. For details on how the projections were made, see Chapter 1. The impact of migration can be seen in the examples shown in the graph at the right, which compares projection scenarios with and without migration in the regions where it will have the greatest impact. In Europe, for instance, the Muslim share of the population is expected to increase from 5.9% in 2010 to 10.2% in 2050 when migration is taken into account along with other demographic factors that are driving population change, such as fertility rates and age. Without migration, the Muslim share of Europe's population in 2050 is projected to be nearly 2 percentage points lower, 8.4%. In North America, the Hindu share of the population is expected to nearly double in the decades ahead, from 0.7% in 2010 to 1.3% in 2050, when migration is included in the projection models. Without migration, the Hindu share of the region's population would remain about the same, 0.8%. In the Middle East and North Africa, the continued migration of Christians into the six Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, is expected to offset the exodus of Christians from other countries in the region. 7 If migration were not factored into the 2050 projections, the estimated Christian share of the region's population would drop below 3%. With migration factored in, however, the estimated Christian share is expected to be just above 3%, down from nearly 4% in 2010. Regional and country-level projections. In addition to making projections at the global level, this report projects religious change in 198 countries and territories with at least 100,000 people as of 2010, covering 99.9% of the world's population. Population estimates for an additional 36 countries and territories are included in regional and global totals throughout the report. The report also divides the world into 6 major regions and looks at how each region's religious composition is likely to change from 2010 to 2050, assuming that current patterns in migration and other demographic trends continue. 8. Due largely to high fertility, sub-Saharan Africa is projected to experience the fastest overall growth, rising from 12% of the world's population in 2010 to about 20% in 2050. The Middle East-North Africa region also is expected to grow faster than the world as a whole, edging up from 5% of the global population in 2010 to 6% in 2050. Ongoing growth in both regions will fuel global increases in the Muslim population. In addition, sub-Saharan Africa's Christian population is expected to double, from 517 million in 2010 to 1.1 billion in 2050. The share of the world's Christians living in sub-Saharan Africa will rise from 24% in 2010 to 38% in 2050. Meanwhile, the Asia-Pacific region is expected to have a declining share of the world's population, 53% in 2050, compared with 59% in 2010. This will be reflected in the slower growth of religions heavily concentrated in the region, including Buddhism and Chinese folk religions, as well as slower growth of Asia's large unaffiliated population. One exception is Hindus, who are overwhelmingly concentrated in India, where the population is younger and fertility rates are higher than in China or Japan. As previously mentioned, Hindus are projected to roughly keep pace with global population growth. India's large Muslim population also is poised for rapid growth. Although India will continue to have a Hindu majority, by 2050 it is projected to have the world's largest Muslim population, surpassing Indonesia. The remaining geographic regions also will contain declining shares of the world's population. Europe is projected to go from 11% to 8%, Latin American and the Caribbean from 9% to 8%, and North America from 5% to a little less than 5%. Europe is the only region where the total population is projected to decline. Europe's Christian population is expected to shrink by about 100 million people in the coming decades, dropping from 553 million to 454 million. While Christians will remain the largest religious group in Europe, they are projected to drop from 3/4 of the population to less than 2/3. By 2050, nearly a quarter of Europeans, 23%, are expected to have no religious affiliation, and Muslims will make up about 10% of the region's population, up from 5.9% in 2010. Over the same period, the number of Hindus in Europe is expected to roughly double, from a little under 1.4 million, 0.2% of Europe's population, to nearly 2.7 million, 0.4%, mainly as a result of immigration. Buddhists appear headed for similarly rapid growth in Europe, a projected rise from 1.4 million to 2.5 million. In North America, Muslims and followers of other religions are the fastest growing religious groups. In the United States, for example, the share of the population that belongs to other religions is projected to more than double, albeit from a very small base, rising from 0.6% to 1.5%. 0.9 Christians are projected to decline from 78% of the U.S. population in 2010 to 66% in 2050, while the unaffiliated are expected to rise from 16% to 26%. And by the middle of the 21st century, the United States is likely to have more Muslims, 2.1% of the population, than people who identify with the Jewish faith, 1.4%, 0.10. In Latin America and the Caribbean, Christians will remain the largest religious group, making up 89% of the population in 2050, down slightly from 90% in 2010. Latin America's religiously unaffiliated population is projected to grow both in absolute number and percentage terms, rising from about 45 million people, 8%, in 2010 to 65 million, 9%, in 2050. Changing religious majorities. Several countries are projected to have a different religious majority in 2050 than they did in 2010. The number of countries with Christian majorities is expected to decline from 159 to 151, as Christians are projected to drop below 50% of the population in Australia, Benin, Bosnia-Herzegovina, France, the Netherlands, New Zealand, the Republic of Macedonia, and the United Kingdom. Muslims in 2050 are expected to make up more than 50% of the population in 51 countries, 2 more than in 2010. As both the Republic of Macedonia and Nigeria are projected to gain Muslim majorities. But Nigeria also will continue to have a very large Christian population. Indeed, Nigeria is projected to have the third largest Christian population in the world by 2050, after the United States and Brazil. As of 2050, the largest religious group in France, New Zealand and the Netherlands is expected to be the unaffiliated.